Hello, welcome back to the channel. My name's Neil. This is turn 4 of Saratoga, part of the Battles of the American Revolution series from GMT Games. In the last video I did a quick overview of the system, very quick overview of the system and some of the special rules and the units and so on in this particular game. And then I played through the first 3 turns all the way up to 10 AM as it is in the game turn time. Those first 3 turns were essentially some manoeuvring into position from both sides, mostly the British movement and a little bit of American movement down here into this area here around Freeman's Farm. Moving into turn 4 then we have what is really what I think of as the first turn proper, at least certainly the first turn that follows the sequence of play and so on that you find in the series rules on the back of the series rule book. So the first thing we do then is we roll a die each and adjust the roll of the die by the initiative for each side. Here there's no real difference, we have basically the same number and the winner gets the initiative. Okay, we have a 7 for the British, who are in red, and blue being the Americans. So the British are going to go first, and that means we get to place their reinforcements on the reinforcements area, which is zone B, all the way over on the top left hand side of the board there. And then we get to see if we can't make our way towards the American position on Bemis Heights, which is sort of the bulk of the forces just here, and also try and get hold of this area, Freeman's Farm area, which is where a victory point is achievable for both sides. And the way the game's set out, in some ways, potentially Freeman's Farm is the only place that really needs to be fought over, because it's quite difficult given how essentially entrenched these American sites are. You've got what's known as Gates' Wing in the darker blue and Arnold's Wing in the lighter blue. They're behind field works and upper hills, quite difficult for the British and their allies to get up those hills and over the fieldworks and get to those key victory areas that are behind the American line. Whereas here, if the British can take this and keep the Americans out, then really they're a VP to the good, and that's all they need to do, and the game then becomes the Americans taking over or trying to stop the British winning through the Freeman's Farm victory point. It's a really interesting way of doing it. It's quite nuanced. The more I play it, the more I've realised how nuanced this game actually is. All the combat that will take place around Freeman's Farm and potentially around the American defences on Bemis Heights will have to take second seat for the time being to the movement of the British side as we close in on those American positions. So starting at the top with the long line here of units that stretch all along the river road by the Hudson River. Now normally they'd be able to use strategic movement and what's known as a road rate, where the road negates other terrain. Here though, there's a hex here which is actually the American VP hex, where there's a ford or a bridge across a tributary river, and you're not allowed, according to the special rules for the game, you're not allowed to use the strategic movement or the road rate, so you have to pay the normal hex cost, which means to move from this hex to this hex it's going to cost 2 for most units, 1 for the movement from a clear hex to a clear hex, plus an additional for the creek crossing. So I'll go ahead and move those. They can move 4, most of these units, with the exception of course of the artillery and the leaders. The leaders will stay with their units, so I'll move those at the same time in this case. So that's 2, 3 and then 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this rate is impeding their movement because these units here, they only have a movement of 4, but they do have a combat strength of 4, which means even if they could cross the river, they cannot stack due to that quite restrictive stacking limit even for units in the game. 3 would move here, and so already we can see how the forces are strung out along this road and really are going to be arriving piecemeal at the front line when they eventually get there. There we go, that's the movement on the river road. I will also take this opportunity to move the reinforcements. Reinforcements is a few infantry recruits and a Hosmer artillery division or unit type with Phillips as the leader. So these will come on and they will move along that river road. Now they will be able to use the strategic road rate because they're not going to cross that river just yet. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which does bring them quite close to the rest of the unit. So there's a long trail up the river road then as we approach Bemis Heights and the American positions that are blocking the road to Albany area. Here we have the light infantry, a mix of militia and native troops. So here we're going to cross, well, there's potential we can cut straight across, but that's going to be quite expensive, crossing the hex sides here, which is a slope, and here is a downslope, both of which will cost. Then we do have the roads as well. So I'm going to take this opportunity to move some of that light infantry along the road a short way to speed up their crossing through the forests. Okay, let's start over here. We have some Jaegers and some light infantry and some regular infantry on the road. So let's move them first. And I think what I want to do is I want to try to get behind this group here because there's a potential delay to release of Gates's wing, the darker blue ones, if the British can hold that in a few turns' time. It's not going to happen just yet, but probably in another 5 or 6 turns we'll start having a die roll to release that wing if we're not within a certain distance of the key hexes along the river road, which really is basically that hex there. Okay, cool. Let me move these guys down. So they're going to have a movement rate of 4, potentially increased along the road. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That will put the Jaegers and the other light infantry in a position to cross along here should they wish to, and the Grenadiers underneath them, which is that unit there. They are going to be able to move along this road and support Freeman's Farm action when it happens. Right, the militia and the Native Americans will move 1, 2, 3, and then 4. They cannot use the strategic rate because they didn't start on the road. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The artillery can move to there, and then we have this big long line here with Fraser's unit and various associated units with him, which I will move again down the road towards Freeman's Farm. They will move 8. I'll keep them all together. I know you're supposed to move one at a time, but there's not really any risk of overstacking right now. There we are, not quite reaching. Not quite reaching. The artillery again being left behind. We're okay to run through that artillery unit because we only have 1 strength point each for these smaller units just there, and artillery can stack for free anyway. Okay, so the American movement is done. Now normally this is the point where we would have any defensive artillery fire, we would rally, and we would have rifle fire, and then we get stuck in with the combat. Now, because basically no one's within combat range and there's no artillery range or anything like that, we're basically just going to skip straight through to the American side. Ordinarily, we would have all of this to do before we move to the second player, and here we've only just kind of done this first bit really. So we just need to skip over that because none of it's really applicable right now. I'll move to the Americans' first turn proper, where we can try to get those Americans into and around Freeman's Farm. The sequence of play is exactly the same for both sides. You have the movement, the rally, and then the various types of ranged fire before close combat. And again, here with the American side here on turn 4, likely to be a very quick turn again, because we quite simply will not be within firing range unless I deliberately aim to be within firing range. And really the only benefit to that really would be to try and delay some of these units getting to here. But that would then leave this open from this direction for Fraser and so on to come through. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and make use of the light infantry and rifle ability of Morgan there, if you can see that, to not only move more easily through some of the wooded terrain, but also to provide an additional zone of control movement cost if you move into their zone of control. So I'll try and use that in a way that limits easy access into this objective area for the British. Everybody else for the American side is really not going to do very much right now. So let me just move all those and basically we'll jump into turn 5. So Arnold here with his units of New Hampshire, 1st and 2nd New Hampshires. They are regular infantry with Arnold. They will come in 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think what we'll do is I kind of want to park them there. There's no zone of control into the forest, which makes this area all around here very interesting to fight in, because you can sneak past people quite easily. However, I do want to protect the zone of control at the end of the road there. That will cause problems because they will have to basically commit to combat or find a way around. So let's do that then. They will move 1, 2, 3, 4, just a regular movement, and here we have a nice zone of control now. For the Americans, Morgan and Dearborn, these two units here, which work very well together, they're going to come in. And the option, as I said, was to use their light infantry ability to move through the forest to come up, fight with the riflemen and the grenadiers there, or alternatively park ourselves in Freeman's Farm. Lots of zone of control benefits to doing that based on the rifle fire cost, the additional costs to move into the terrain around a rifle unit. Let's do that actually. Let's do that. Let's just park those guys right there. I mean, we have this overlapping zone of control here, and we also have the zones of control around the farm as well. Okay. Next up, the 2nd New York unit here. Relatively weak unit, just 2 combat strength, but every little bit helps. So let's park this guy. 2, 3, 4, 5. We cannot cross that hex, so we'll probably stop there just to try and prevent any attempt to cut across country and up this road here behind Freeman's Farm. And then after that, I think it's just a case of moving some of these units, if possible, from Arnold's wing around Bemis Heights. We have really just the one that can move, unless I want to start moving those militia from the powder magazine. Is it the powder magazine? Yeah, the powder magazine. So really it's just this unit here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That'll bring him nicely behind the 2nd New Yorkers. Okay, that is essentially turn 4 done. Moving into turn 5, we roll the dice for initiative. It is a American win so far, but the British could use their momentum chit to re-roll that, to try and take the advantage, because the Americans could get themselves nicely situated around Freeman's Farm even more than they are already. Yeah, let's do that but then if I do that as the British, I will be squandering this chit here. Well, not squandering, but I would be giving up the opportunity to use it in another circumstance. And they're not easy to come by. They're only really achieved through a really significant victory in combat. Yeah, let's spend it and try to re-roll, because I think getting into position on Freeman's Farm is going to be very important. We roll a 9. Cool. That is the British turn then, or the British initiative turn, meaning they will go first. Okay, so I'll just flip that counter there to the British side, take their reinforcements and place them in the reinforcements area. Now, for this group of units, they come on basically by boat. And so these are the Royal Navy and associated colleagues who will come on the river on the VP hex. That is the American automatic win. Now, they're kind of limited in terms of their movement. They have a white box around their movement, which means they have to stay within 2 hexes of the river, so they can't really move. They're not really super mobile compared to the other troops, but there's quite a lot of them and they're quite strong in combination, and they're going to sit on that hex just by Wilbur Basin and the tributary into the Hudson River, which is just here. So I'm just going to pop those there for now. Actually sat on the river, they're on boat. That's not where they come in. They come in here. Stacking is okay, but we have to absolve the stacking, overstacking before the turn ends. Otherwise we have some step losses, so we may need to see some spreading out or some delay of some of those guys moving through that hex just here. So let's do that. I don't want to get everything muddled up. Okay, the other option of course is I could push the Royal Navy troops back to the next turn. That's the other option. I think for now I'll have them come on and I'll try and move them down the river, because there's some decent artillery in that stack. You know, there's 2 artillery units with a decent strength between them. One's got 3, one's got 2. Artillery don't get much higher than that, with an occasional exception. Okay, yeah. So let's move Burgoyne and the 20th Infantry. Now I don't want to move too far, because if I get too close, I'll be in range of defensive fire, and also I'll free up Gates's wing. But I do want to get down that road. That's the tricky bit. I want to get my forces in this area here, so I can kind of overpower this group and potentially charge up the river road as it runs here, because this is relatively lightly defended and relatively easy terrain to get to this VP hex here. Now that's easy being a relative thing, because we do have cannon and lots of troops there, but compared to the hilly terrain here, it is certainly a little bit easier for the British down that side, because I don't really want to spend the whole game just fighting over Freeman's Farm. So okay, let's do that. And we'll move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, let's leave it there. The artillery range is 4, but this is only a strength 1 artillery, which is pretty weak, and their range is not great at all. I think they have to roll a 9 at that distance on a D10 to actually hit. Okay, so these guys can move. They're going to stay there and there. This one cannot use the road rate over that creek. So this is probably where I bring on the Royal Navy. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and then 4 along the roads, just to kind of keep them out the way, because the Navy are now here. And the Navy, there's quite a lot of them. They're quite strong, as I said. So these 3 units here. We have the Mitchelson artillery, which is currently on its reverse side, and then we have the Royal Navy and the 47th, presumably Marines, and they can stay together. They're not overstacked or anything. So for speed, I'll just move those together. Well, they should be separately manoeuvred. So I'll just go 1, 2, and 3. We also need to think about these guys. They will not get very far with a movement of 2 across that bridge or ford. These guys only have a movement of 2. And they're not allowed to stray very far from the river either. So let's go just to there on the road with those 2 units. That'll move them out of the way, but keep them within range of that VP hex, which is just here with the blue star, if you can see that. I think you can see that. There's a blue star there, I promise, which indicates it's an instant win for the Americans if they control that hex. So they're out of the way there. They're going to guard, but they are going to let some of these guys move across. And that's going to be, again, without using the road rate. Wow, that's a bit annoying actually, because that's really tricky. I'm going to need to move this one here for 1 to allow movement of some of these guys, I think. It gets really, really awkward down this road for these troops. There's so many British troops and allies, the green ones are the Germans. It just gets really, really awkward. Right, anyways, 1, 2, 3, 4. And basically, we are going to have another traffic jam, probably for another turn, but that does mean now these guys are a little bit on their own. Okay, let's have a look nearer to Freeman's Farm. I think what I want to do is I do want to try to push Arnold back for sure, probably using Fraser, but I do need to make sure some of these guys are in support when I do that. There's no artillery just here, but there's quite a lot of units there against again, it's not that they're, it's not so much that the forces are mismatched, it's just I'd like to have more as the British player, because combat victories are quite hard to come by. I've found, like out and out victories where the enemy retreats, they're quite hard. Don't really want to get pinned, which is a result where you're stuck in combat. Okay, so anyway, let's move. We've got movement points of 4 and they have light infantry. Leaders share the same movement benefit across rougher terrain, so we could probably go 1, 2 and then 3. We're in that zone of control, so we kind of have to stop, and then we are adjacent to Arnold, so we will fight Arnold later in this turn. 2, 3, they will go there. 1, 2, 3, they will probably have to stop. It costs 1.5 movement points for the regular infantry to cross woods, so let's just move there to make a bit of space with these ones, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Can't get any closer than that because we would be overstacked there. We cannot go into the forest if we've used strategic movement, which I did, and you cannot end adjacent either when you're using strategic movements, so adjacent to the enemy, that is. So this last one then, this cannon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, using the strategic rate, meaning we only have left the guys in the middle, mix of German forces and militia and so on. So we can move 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now that's okay, strategic movement. We're not finishing in the zone of control or anything. Won't be able to use them this turn in terms of their artillery because they're only defensive. So when we move over to the defensive phase in a moment, that will be the American cannon firing, not the British. And these light infantry, they're going to come up the road as well, I think. Let's move these first, get them a bit closer. So that's going to be 1, 2. Leave those there. We've got 2 light infantry there. 1, 2, and then it will be 3 and 4. 3 and 4 next to these guys, and they have to stop and pay extra to go into the zone of control. The grenadiers here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, having to stop because of the zone of control of a rifle unit. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's where they will stop. They're pretty weak in combat, those militia. They're more useful just to cause problems more than free up control of hexes, if you like. Okay, that's all the movement done for the British. We move on next to the rally, but there's no rally, so we go to defensive artillery. And the only cannon within range currently for the Americans is this unit here. As I said before, it's only got a strength of 1. It's at a distance of 3. So on this table here, we roll a 1. We have a strength point of 1 firing, so we need to roll a die. At range of 3 hexes, it's 9 on the die to hit. Should we be successful, we'll have to roll again to wound, essentially. We've rolled 9, my goodness me. Okay, so I wasn't expecting that to happen. So what I should have done is declared a target, and the target would be the 20th infantry underneath the leader Burgoyne. Now here is where, as the American player, you really hope to get a high score and actually kill that leader if we can. Right, a 2. That's pretty abysmal, quite frankly. So on a 2, we haven't done anybody any damage, but we have forced a retreat. And so a retreat is simply moving back 1 space in the priority direction. And the priority direction is basically the map edge you came from. So here, really, that would actually be on here, meaning they would end up overstacked. This way here is not a priority direction, and it's not any further away. So I would say, personally, you'd have to come back into this hex, causing some damage. And because we would have 2 4-strength units, one of them would need to be flipped to its reverse side in order to resolve that stacking, meaning the Americans have caused some damage when we weren't expecting them to, and the leader will actually drop back to prevent any risk of being caught out on their own and surrounded by enemy troops. Okay, that is defensive artillery fire. That's all it is. You roll a die, and then if you hit, you roll another die. Next up is a very similar principle for the rifle phase. Now there's only 2 rifle units in the game. Currently they are both here. They are both first fire rifle units, meaning they haven't fired yet, surprisingly enough. One is the Morgan Demi Leader, as it's known, for the Americans, and one is the Jaeger unit. Now they're both going to fire simultaneously. They both have the same principle, except one will hit on a slightly lower number because Morgan has a strength of 3, which is this sort of shown there. Oops, got a strength of 3. And the Jaegers have a strength of 1, but as I said, the Jaegers can fire twice when they have an open flank, I think. I'll have to double check that in a minute, but they do get to fire twice in certain circumstances, so I'll double check that. But the basic principle is, on a roll of 7, the Jaegers will hit. On a roll of 4, the American unit will hit. So let's just roll those. Okay, the Americans have missed completely. That is a 0 rather than a 10. And the Americans don't do any damage. There are some modifiers for rifle fire, as there is with artillery fire, but here it's nowhere near enough to make a difference, basically. The riflemen would be firing at each other. I should probably say you do need to have a sort of a target unit at the beginning. I'm so used to doing this that I tend to automatically pick the target without actually saying it out loud, which is a bit silly on video. But anyway, right, so the Americans have missed, but the Jaegers have hit, so there's probably no need to roll another die because we would only take the highest. Now they would have the first fire bonus, which is this number, which is this here. Basically, the first time they see action, they get an extra +1 to their die roll modifier. A little bit wasted for the Americans, but the Germans do have a 10 plus hit. But now what we need to do for the Germans is roll their hit target, and we use a different table. We used this one for the artillery, but now we use the rifle one. and scored an 8. Wow, that's pretty cool. So they're not artillery, so Morgan is actually disrupted. Right, now, Morgan is going to have to retreat 3 hexes and then become disrupted. He cannot go through his own control without being captured, but he does have to end 3 hexes away from the unit that shot at him. It's going to have to go, looking at all the zones of control dotted around, it's going to have to go this way. 1, 2, and then 3, and then become disrupted. That is truly unfortunate for the American player. Truly unfortunate. Because that is going to be quite a pain to rally that unit. We also have to take into account that we've suffered a disruption, meaning we lose a morale point. So when morale comes into it a little bit more in close combat, over the course of time and attrition, morale sinks, and when morale sinks, the modifiers for combat are affected. So that's a really unfortunate first result. But we also now have to roll for Dearborn, who needs to work out whether he's going to retreat, and that's basically a morale check. Where you roll the die, modify it by their morale modifier, which is printed on there, and then adjusted by up there. And we roll the die. So they've rolled a 6. That's higher than 5. 5 would be the minimum they would need to pass. So they don't actually retreat, which is something. Although maybe they would want to in this circumstance. I don't know, because they're going to get into some tough combat in a moment. Okay, that is the rifle fire phase complete. Next up we have close combat, and that is quite a process. It's quite involved, relatively simple, but there's definitely a few steps involved. As I said in the last video, this is where it becomes less solitaire friendly for me. There are a number of different procedures and so on you have to undertake, one of which is play cards, and that doesn't really flow particularly nicely for me personally when I play solo. There is a solo assistant that you can use which does help, but overall I do find it a little bit disadvantageous to play solo. Playing 2-player, I'm sure it's really good, but I've not played it 2-player so far. But anyway, what I'll do for the video, I will play it as though I'm 2 players, the first combat, then I'll show you how to do it solo without the solo assistant, and then on the third combat, when and if we get to it, I will use the solo assistant, and from then on I'll use that then as well. But this first time, let's do it as though it's a 2-player game. So the first thing you need to do really is decide what you're going to do, and the attacking player basically identifies the combats that are going to happen. And so the combats that are going to happen is, there's only 2. There's these guys here against Arnold, and if you're adjacent, you have to attack adjacent enemies. And here we have adjacency here against Dearborn. If you're adjacent to multiple enemies, you have to divide your attacks between all the units you're adjacent to, and that's quite important. And when you get into these tough battles, particularly over on the hilltop and on the American side over in the corner there, that diffusion of combat strength across a front line makes it quite difficult to break the enemy lines. But I digress. Let's start with a relatively straightforward one. Let's start with Dearborn and the German forces. First thing we need to do is we need to pick a lead unit. So the lead unit is typically the one that's going to provide you the best combat modifier for morale, which is the little number just kind of in superscript just there. If it's going to focus, it probably won't focus, but there we go, it's that little number. So here we have the Grenadiers, the Jaegers and the Chasseur unit, both have a modifier of 1, so we have a benefit there for using the Grenadiers. So that's going to be our lead unit. We have no choice but to be the lead unit of the American with Dearborn, who also has a +2 modifier for morale. So they're at basically level pegging right there. Then we need to work out the combat strength and the odds. Now this is a bit different in that you add all the odds together. So these 3 units have to attack this one. We have 3, 4 and 5 combat strength for the German side, and then 3 for the Americans. Now you have to adjust combat strength in favour of the defenders. So here we have 5 versus 3. It's not a 2-to-1, it is in fact a 1-to-1 because you're adjusting in favour of the defenders. Were that the other way round and 3 to 5, it would then move up to 1-to-1 as well. So anyway, you always round in favour of the defender. So it's a 1-to-1. We are fighting with the lead units being the Grenadiers and the Dearborn unit, and then we need to determine the DRMs. Now there's a long list of them here, and what I'll do is I'll go through them one at a time when I work out the die roll. But for now, we would normally have to work that out. Then we resolve these tactics cards. Now this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky. So there's no leader involved, okay? Which means that we only have a choice of 4 cards. If I find the right 4 cards, I'll show you what that is. Okay, so as the attacker, this is our choice of cards. We have Stand Fast, Attack an Echelon, Withdraw and Skirmish. Each one has a reference down the side for when it's played as an attacking card or a defending card and against what other card. It's essentially a grid in card form, and for those of you who struggle with the grid on the cards, and I do, this is, I find, easy to use. So basically you'd cross-reference what you're playing as the attacker with what the enemy are playing as the defender. The different colours, and these colours are repeated on the cards and the player aid here, relate to whether or not you have a leader in your unit or your attacking stack, and whether or not there's an empty flank. So this kind of pale yellow colour, and the reason why I said we could only use 4 of the available cards, is when you do not have a leader. The lighter green is when you do have a leader. The darker green is when you do have a leader, plus a flank is open on one side, and that's essentially space to the left or right of where your unit is. So we have these four cards. Now I'm going to, as the I keep wanting to say allied. I've played far too many World War II games recently, but as the German player, I'm going to play the skirmish card. Now, as the Americans, I don't have a leader because I'm on my own in that hex as Dearborn. So I can only play those 4 cards as well. Now I'm kind of surrounded a little bit, so I'm going to withdraw. Now, depending on what the other player plays, you could have what's called a no combat. And this is why I try to work out these cards before I do the DRMs, just to save myself a bit of maths, especially with the solo assistant. The potential is quite high to have a no combat result when you withdraw. So let's see how that works. So the Americans have played a no combat as a withdraw as a defender. We, as the British, have played the skirmish. Now the result is no combat. So in this case, what's going to happen is combat will be skipped, and so all the rest of those steps here will stop, and we'll just do the advance after combat and a retreat. So these guys are going to retreat here, and then at least one of these units must move in to the space that was left vacant. And so that's an example of what can happen when you are having combat, and you can use those cards, or you can, they're actually available in like these little tactics chits as well, and you can avoid combat completely if you play those correctly. So that's fine. And the reason I struggle with that solo is because you know what the other players are going to do, and you can rig it so that you always get the result you want. But anyway, this combat now is Arnold and Fraser. Now these guys do have leaders. There's no open flank on the attacking side, so that's fine. We do have an open flank for the Americans, but let's just think for now about who's actually involved. So we have a strength of 6 plus a 4, that's a 10, and we're fighting off against a defending strength of 6 in total, meaning we have that would be rounded in favour of the defenders, meaning I think we have a 1-to-1, possibly a 3-to-2. Let's see what we've got. It's definitely not a 2-to-1. Where are we? I think that's going to be a 1-to-1. I think we round in favour of the defenders, so let's do that as a 1-to-1. The lead unit will be the 5 strength light infantry Earl of Balakars there, and the equivalent would be the 1st New Hampshires for the Arnold stack on the American side. Arnold, I think normally what I would try to do here is probably try to withdraw, but for the purposes of the video I will stand fast as the American player, and the British will do a frontal assault. So we play those. Okay, now that is going to mean, so the stand fast as the defender versus a frontal assault, it's actually a -1 to the eventual dice. Okay, so we've worked out the odds, that's 1-to-1. We've got a negative modifier for the card play, and then we roll a die and we apply other modifiers. And I'll roll the red one because it's the red side attacking, and we have a 9. Okay, cool. So straight away we've got a negative modifier of -1 from that card, so that's going to be an 8 modified roll. We modify then based on the attacker's benefits, and we have the adjusted morale of the attacker's lead unit. The attacking lead unit is the one I said, which is Balakars, which has a +1 modifier, so that would actually become a 9 again. Now it says adjusted morale because it can be affected by the morale status of the army, and basically the further towards the left you get, the more it's impacted by that track. But there's no modifier just here, so we're staying at a 9. Next up we have the close combat DRM of the leader. Fraser has a DRM for combat of 1, which is the number on the left, so we are moving that up actually to 10. Now there's no 10 on these dice, so we'll just have to note that it's 10. No one is a rifle unit on the enemy side, so there's no modifier there. No one's disrupted. There are no dragoons. No, they're not exclusively militia. They're not surrounded, and there's no ammo depletion. Ammo depletion is for a specific scenario, not this campaign. And so we've got an adjusted die roll there of 10, which is pretty awesome for the British. But then let's adjust that further by the defenders. So we have the adjusted morale of the defenders lead unit. That is a 1, so back down to 9. Then we adjust for the defending leaders DRM, which is a 2, so that's moving from 9 down to 7. And then we have no one attacking as a rifle unit, and militia are not attacking, not across a hex side, not across a fieldworks, not upslope, not across a ravine. The attacker is not surrounded, and again there's no ammo depletion. So we have finally, after all that, a modified DRM of 7. We look across, we have a 7 on a 1-to-1 is a retreat, meaning Arnold's unit here, or the 1st New Hampshires actually have to retreat. So they go there and stop. That's not too bad actually, because it could have been a hell of a lot worse. And Arnold himself is going to leg it with them, because I don't really want to get him stuck there and risk another attack with a leader at this stage. Now, because we had a retreat, we do need to have a morale check. Okay, so the morale check would be a +5, or a 5+ even, on the die roll. It's a 0, even with the modifier. That is a fail, so he also has to retreat alongside his compatriots, with the lead unit at least of this side moving in, and here they will all move into that unit as an advance, onto that unit's vacated hex, as an advance after combat. Now, the combat results often end with a morale adjustment, but not that retreat result. Had it been disrupted or a step loss or captured units or anything like that, you would have had step losses. But there we don't. And that is the end of that combat. And I think probably the end of the video. We are at the end of the turn. At this point we would check for automatic victory, which would be capture of that hex and the 2 hexes over on Bemis Heights. None of those are replied. Therefore, we have ended turn number 5 and we'll move into turn 6 in the next video. Before I disappear though, just to note that this area here is currently not a VP for the British, because even though the British do control Freeman's Farm itself, Dearborn is in that objective area, and also actually Arnold projects a zone of control into there as well. So not quite there for the British in terms of controlling Freeman's Farm, but certainly a better result in combat for them versus the results for the Americans. Okay, that's it for today. See you next time.